Welcome Porsche Club of America for our next in our series of videos, one I'm pretty excited about, the 996 GT3. So I've gathered up 4.5 996 GT3s with me here today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between the .1, the .2, the various packages, the Clubsport, the RS, cars that are more street-oriented, more track-oriented. We're going to touch a little bit on the 996 Aerokit cars. We are not going to touch on some models such as the Cup cars or any not street legal editions. That would be its own video in itself. So we're going to primarily focus on cars that were street legal and primarily on cars that were sold here in the US, with one caveat being that sadly we did not get the 996.1 GT3. We were denied that car. But thankfully it's 2024 and we're just knocking on the door of the 25-year rule. So we're going to start seeing the floodgates open for people being able to bring in 996.1 GT3s. So let's get started. There's exactly 5,139 996 GT3s in the world, and we're going to get you excited to potentially own one.
Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon and never miss a video. We've got lots of Porsche content coming your way.
Are you protecting your drive? I certainly haven't been. I've long neglected to install a radar or dash cam in my car. Turns out I can have the best of both worlds with the Escort Radar Redline 360C, as well as an Escort M2 Smart Dashcam, which I'll be mounting on the windshield. Escort Radar's friend of PCA and sponsor of this and many other videos sent us the Redline and the M2 to test out in our own cars. So without further ado, let's unbox these and install them in my car. The Escort Redline can be used alone or paired with the M2 Smart Dashcam. The Drive Smarter app integration combines navigation and detection and gives access to settings, features, and to view footage.
Caution, red light camera ahead.
Arrows on the red line tell you where law enforcement has been detected. There's the call band. The M2 Smart Dashcam adds protection with date, time, GPS coordinates, and velocity timestamped onto the footage. Be ready for every scenario. Protect your drive. Visit escortradar.com today.
Okay, let's do a little bit of a history lesson, because for us to really understand these cars, we have to understand what was happening with Porsche at the time, what was happening in the world, and how these cars came to be. So go back to 1996. It's hard to fathom this now, but Porsche was selling just one car, the 993. They were in kind of a dire financial predicament. The Boxster was just about to launch, was going to be great for the brand. We were still several years off until the Cayenne was going to debut, which really set the brand on fire in terms of at least financial success. And so they were selling, we were just out the door selling the 993 RS, and there was actually a debate whether there would be sort of a successor to that car. They were battening down the hatches and just trying to get the Boxster launched and trying to stay alive. And we had the GT1, and the GT1 was making waves. And they got approval to build a 996 Cup car, which actually, interestingly enough, the Cup car debuted in April of 1998, before the street car actually debuted. They finally got the approval, and they said, okay, let's take a Carrera 4 body shell. We're going to take a Mezger-based motor, a lot of the technology from the GT1, and we're going to try to make it work. And that's really what they did with this car. They did this in conjunction with the turbo development. So they had green-lighted the 996 turbo, and one of the ways they were able to sell this to the board was they were able to tell them, hey, we can kind of share some of the same resources. We know the turbo is going to use the Mezger-based motor, and that's the path that they took. So believe it or not, the very first 996 GT3s, I think production started around April of '99, and those cars actually, they started a production run. They predicted they were going to make 350. Little did they know that was going to be a little bit off the mark. Then they had to stop production because they ramped up the new, soon-to-be 996 Turbo. And there was so much demand for this car, they started up again. So Interestingly enough, these 996.1 cars were made in kind of two batches. We had the first initial batch, then they paused for a second, started 996 turbo production, and then we have a second batch. All the cars are going to be anywhere from late 99 build until end of 2000 build. Unfortunately, production came to an end even in Europe because they were phasing in new emissions requirements starting in 2002 that this original motor did not yet meet. So that's the basic history of what was happening. Again, Porsche only thought they were going to sell 350 of these cars, give or take. Total production on the .1 ran just over 1,800 cars. So clearly there was a lot of demand. One thing a lot of people haven't talked about is the fact that this was called the GT3. We're so used to that name now in 2024, but if we reflect back, all their previous cars were labeled RS. The original 2.7 liter RS, the 964 RS, and of course the 993 RS. And Porsche decided that name was being used by everybody and they wanted something kind of unique, and they adopted the nomenclature GT3. So if we want to know where the GT3 started, it started right here. Let's talk about this specific car that's in front of me. This is a model year 2000 996 GT3. A lot of people will call it a GT3 Clubsport. It is and it isn't. This car is officially a Clubsport, but Porsche did not consider it a distinct model. They considered it an option package. One of the things that's really fun for me is that this was just in the era they were in financial trouble, yet they were not as savvy a company as they are now, because believe it or not, do you know how much the Clubsport option package cost in 2000? Zero, nothing. You just said, I want a Clubsport, and they said, sure, knock yourself out. So you could have a standard comfort edition, or you could have a Clubsport. So it's kind of a funny thing. Now, essentially, if you want air in the tires, there's an upcharge. But back then, you want this package? No doubt. There's a lot of debate about how many of these cars were produced. I've never seen official numbers that I feel like we can rely on. So I'm going to refrain from quoting a number on these cars, because again, it doesn't get a distinct model code. It's simply an option code, which was option code 003. In terms of what you got with the Clubsport package, aesthetically, the cars are basically the same on the exterior versus a regular GT3. The changes predominantly were making it oriented for the track. The only major mechanical change of note is they did get a single mass lightweight flywheel. And in fact, this is the only one that wasn't an RS that got that. The subsequent 996.2 Clubsport did not get the lightweight clutch and flywheel. So the fun part about this is it has all that gear rattle we've come to love in the RS cars. You did get a pair of Nomex Recaro sports seats. We're going to do a little interior portion of the video. We'll dive into this more, as well as you did get a full cage. Although it is a bolt-in cage, it's not a fully welded-in cage, a la, for example, a 996 Cup car, or even the outgoing 993 RS cars that had the full factory cage, which was welded in. A pretty cool package. But let's talk a little bit about the .1 and why we didn't get it here in the US. Remember, Porsche was in kind of financial challenges. It was going to be expensive to bring this car in and make it emissions compliant. This was a one-off motor, a 3.6 liter motor rated at 360 horsepower. And they said, well, if we're only going to sell 350, it just doesn't make sense. And sadly, here in the US, we were denied this car, which is really heartbreaking. And so I'm pretty darn excited about the fact that we're going to be getting it here really any day now. Essentially, the first ones were delivered in late '99. Those cars are now past that 25-year threshold. So you're going to start seeing some of these cars hit our shores. With that said, again, total production around 1,800 units worldwide. Most of them were used as intended, so it's going to be quite challenging. So don't just think you're going to hop on a plane and head over to Europe and pick one of these up for a song. I wish that were the case, but I think people realize what they are. A couple things about .1s versus .2 cars. Let's just start at the front. We have a .1 and a .2 by comparison. So this is, of course, the original headlight design that Porsche came up with. It was derived off what they were doing with the GT1. I will be honest, I'm not going to blow any smoke at you. When this car came out, I had a 993, and I really struggled with this car. And sometimes you have to see things over time. And I remember when the .2 came out, I thought, well, that's better. That's an improvement. You know, they're kind of going the right direction. Funny enough, in 2024, I actually prefer the aesthetics of the .1 car, the purity of the original design, and flat out, I just think this is a gorgeous, gorgeous car. So much so that I have a car in the background that is one of mine, and you'll see that car and why it speaks to me. So this is what you see on the front design of the .1. The other thing that's interesting about a .1 is that because of the budgetary constraints, they were basically told, look, you can build this car, but you have to use the same Aerokit that we offer on the regular 996 because we're not going to go to the expense to develop two separate and distinct Aerokits. So if you, for example, buy a 996 with a factory Aerokit, which was already on the market before this car launched, you could have had this basic look. A couple giveaways would have been on an Aerokit car, it would not be cut out for the front and center radiator on that car. That's a distinct difference with that car. The other really dead giveaway, the dead giveaway is ride height. If anything, Porsche absolutely nailed the ride height on these cars. I mean, it actually shocks me they delivered this car from the factory at this ride height. It's pretty unbelievable. When we do the chassis inspection, we'll talk about how to measure ride height on these cars. But it was really one of the first cars where Porsche really, really, really dialed wheel fitment and ride height, which really sets the car apart. The other very, very, very minor, and now we're doing something I love to do, you know, we're gonna have nitpick stuff, that you can spot a GT3 versus an Aerokit car is, believe it or not, the GT3, they did not paint this gurney flap. It's black on a GT3. On a factory Aerokit car, that is painted body color. Why exactly they did that, I'm not entirely sure, but sort of an interesting, distinct difference. Other than that, the basic car itself, the body shell, really didn't change over the production between a .1 and a .2. The biggest changes come mechanically. So, lest we think Porsche had forgotten about us poor souls in the US, when this car's production came to an end in the end of 2000, they were looking forward and they said, we need to develop a motor that will be compliant in the US and frankly in California. And so, believe it or not, actually we drove kind of the process and the development of the second generation motor. So that motor had a whole litany of improvements, was rated at 381 horsepower versus 360 horsepower. And that car was emissions legal all throughout the US. And that same motor then went everywhere else in the world. There was no longer a different motor for, say, a US car versus a rest of world car. And I will say that motor feels appreciably stronger than the first generation motor. When these were tested brand new, there was some kerfuffle around whether they were really making rated power. Some testers in period were saying they weren't fully making the 360 horsepower they were claiming. Whether that's true or not, there was a lot of noise around that. These cars were rated at 381 horsepower, and when they were new, testers were actually finding they were more close to 400 horsepower. So it's sort of interesting, and you'll note it when you drive the two cars back to back. We'll do a little bit of driving on these cars and give you my impressions there, but in an overall sense, they're both wonderful cars. The original car feels a little bit lighter on power, but it has less weight. I think these cars picked up 50 or 60 pounds in the transition to the .2. Brakes are better on a .2. They use a 4-piston front caliper on the early cars, a 6-piston on the later cars. Steering feel, I don't know exactly what changed. I'd have to look into it, but I really enjoy the steering feel on these cars. Some of it might have to do with wheel size. They upsized the wheels from the 8 here to the 8.5 on the second generation, and the rear wheels went from a 10 to an 11. I'm not sure if that's what it is, and it may, in full fairness, it may be a difference to the car I drove with the particular alignment setup and tire versus another one I drove. That's one thing you always have to keep in mind. These cars are now 20 years old, and so sometimes these differences you might pick up might just be the difference between those two cars and less a difference between the two generations. But whichever one you end up with, they're absolutely fabulous cars. We'll talk about what some of those differences are, but ultimately, if you remember nothing else, by quality. So whether it's going to be a .1 car or a .2 car, what you want to buy with one of these is you want to buy the best quality your budget can afford and the best quality for your intended purpose. So let's jump in particular to the exterior. I'm going to do a walk around. I'm going to talk about the wheels and the trim on these various cars. So again, this is a .1. It is a Club Sport, but these same trim items will apply whether it's a Club Sport or a normal car. They did use the Sport Design wheels. These were made by BBS. They're an 18.8 in the front ET52 and an 18.10 ET65 in the rear. And they did use a 5mm spacer from the factory. They're kind of a heavy wheel. I think the rear wheels are knocking on the door of 29 pounds. So if there's any negative feedback on this car, they definitely could have used a lighter set of footwear. Frankly, that was probably budget driven as well. This wheel was already designed and in production. So that was what was happening there. Later on, they went to a larger rear tire. They went to a 295, but a .1's original fitment was a 285 section rear tire. Other things that you'll know on these cars, every single 996 GT3 is a non-sunroof car. I've had someone tell me, oh, I have a non-sunroof one. Well, yes, you and over 5,000 other people have that same thing. I love the fact that they're non-sunroof. Color-wise, you'll notice we've got 3 cars here that are Speed Yellow. The most common color on these cars, Arctic Silver, would be number 1, then followed by black. Number 3 would be Speed Yellow. I believe number 4 is Guards Red, and then white. I think that's kind of the order of them. But again, color is so highly preferential. Buy the color that you like. Okay, a couple other things that I would point out on the .1 cars. If you kind of stand back here, I'll get my video guy over here, you'll notice the bumper cover did completely change, and it's pretty subtle between a .1 and a .2. The easiest way to spot it is a .2, has more defined lines coming down, and it's a little bit, of a sharper crease on the bottom. This one's got a little bit rounder. I prefer the aesthetics, again, of the .1 Aerokit over the .2, but we're probably splitting hairs here. A lot of people ask about the headlights on these cars. Would they have ever come with the orange markers? No, these cars were produced late enough in production that they all generally had the clear, like you will see here. They didn't have the traditional frying eggs with the orange markers on them. Let's walk around to the rear. Let's talk a little bit about this Aerokit. It's kind of euphemistically called the taco wing, kind of for obvious reasons. It looks like a folded taco. Again, they were not allowed to develop a whole new Aerokit for the car, so it's shared with the standard 996 Aerokit, but they did add the gurney flap. They felt like it needed that for additional downforce. Because this is a European car, there are no bumperettes. One of the other tells, if you see a 996 Aerokit car with rear bumperettes, well, then we know it's not a real GT3 because the real GT3 was not a US car. Only the US cars got bumperettes. And so that'd be one of your tells. So if you pulled up behind one and you thought, man, it looks like a GT3, if this is painted and it has rear bumperettes, it's likely a 996 Aerokit car. So those are kind of some of the exterior things on those cars. Because we're talking about that, let's jump back, because I do have a 996 Aerokit car. This is one of my cars. I dearly love this car. One of the gives is, if you look at the front bumper on an Aerokit car, unless it's a Tiptronic, this will be filled in because they did not get a center radiator. A GT3 always has a center radiator, and so that will be cut out. However, if someone added an Aerokit after the fact, this is a factory installed Aerokit car, oftentimes they will have the cutout because if you order a new one from Porsche, they come with that cutout, and so you have to accommodate for that. Let's walk around to the back, and you'll see the gurney flap again on this car. A really subtle difference. Why Porsche did this, I'm not entirely certain, but you'll notice the gurney flap is painted body color. Also another give, sometimes if you have an Aerokit that was added to a car, they usually have GT3 parts, and therefore oftentimes it'll be black. And then you'll note the bumperettes as well, which denote this as a US model car. Okay, it's 2003 and us here in America, we're just raising our hands in prayer. We're just so excited we finally get the much vaunted GT3. We've been briefing all our friends in Europe getting this car for several years now, and it lands in our shore in late 2003 as a 2004 model. It's also what we call a 996.2. So the Porsche made a litany of changes to the regular Carrera starting in 2002. They improved the layout, for example, on the interior. They updated the material quality a little bit. They're slightly more rigid. They redesigned the headlights, predominantly because they got feedback that they shouldn't be shared with the Boxster. I think that's entirely wrong, but that was what was happening in period. And so again, 996.2 was sold here in the US and it was sold throughout the rest of the world as well. The biggest difference, of course, spotter's guide, the headlights did change. They are distinctly different now than the Boxster. One change with the GT3 versus another Carrera or the Turbo are these ribs in the headlights itself. Those are unique to the GT cars. So one of the spots, sometimes I've seen a few GT3s, particularly ones that have had a kind of a rough life, I will see them with incorrect headlights because you could put a regular Carrera light in this car. It will fit and work just fine, but that's usually a sign that the headlights have been replaced because they no longer have the correct headlight. Again, they redesigned the Aerokit for this car. And what was cool about this period of time is things were going better for Porsche. They were making money and they were allowed to actually have two distinct Aerokits. And so there's a little bit of confusion. There is the GT3 Aerokit and there is also the Carrera Aerokit. And oddly enough, you could spec either on a regular 996. Of course, you could not spec a Carrera kit on a GT3. The way you can tell, the biggest difference is the rear wing, and when we get there, I'll talk about that. But you can see the new front bumper design. Again, I slightly prefer the original design myself. However, I will say there are a couple advantages of the second generation spoiler. If you look at the side, it's more tapered in on a .2 than on a .1, and these take a lot of impact on a .1 because they kind of flare out, and 991 first generation cars are slightly lower to begin with. And so it's really hard to keep this free of damage on a first generation car. The side skirts changed, and now this is an area where I actually feel like they made an improvement. It's probably hard to get the scale, but this crease is actually much sharper on a .2, and it actually moves air farther back because one of the changes that they wanted to make was they were going to go to a 295 section rear tire, so 10 millimeters wider. They also went to an 11-inch wide wheel, and so you'll notice wheel fitment on a .2 is better out of the box than it is on a .1, and so they wanted to basically use the side skirts to move air around the wheel from a aerodynamic standpoint. And so I actually find this side skirt to be a little better looking. So if I designed mine, it would have a .1 front bumper and a taco wing, but it would have a .2 side skirts. I'm sure some purists would be very, very upset about that. But I like the look and what they did there. The other big change is the wheel. And one of the things that's interesting about this wheel is that, and a lot of people don't pick this up, but this wheel is actually designed as an homage to the original 1967 911S Fuchs. You'll note it's 5-spoke, but they're split spokes. So if you actually stand back and look at it, now you can kind of see it's drawn on the lines of the Fuchs. This wheel was so successful for Porsche, you'll notice this is now kind of the standard for GT3s, is some derivative of this wheel design, first introduced in model year 2004 on the .2 GT3. So a very, very successful design. It also saved some weight versus the outgoing BBS wheel, which is especially impressive because they went a ½ inch bigger in the front, an inch bigger in the rear, better offsets, and yet they weighed less. Still not an incredibly lightweight wheel, but for a factory strong TUV approved wheel, pretty impressive, and just a good looking wheel. And again, the wheel fitment is just perfect on these cars. This gets me to my other point. When the 996 first came out, one of my complaints about the car was that it was slab-sided. You know, it's kind of, you don't have these hips, and the outgoing 993 had these big hips in the back. And I thought, man, they've lost the hips. As I've grown in my appreciation for Porsche and my love for Porsche, my primary love harkens back to these original early cars. And the early cars didn't have hips. And so to me, the design of the 996 harkens back to the earliest of 911s. And I just really, really appreciate that with a new set of eyes. Okay, jumping back to the back, We, of course, have the new rear spoiler. This design, again, it's highly preferential which one you like. I would say this is probably conventionally considered a little more attractive than the Taco spoiler. I kind of like the Taco because it's highly unconventional. It's kind of a goofy look. But this spoiler, probably more people like it, but you can say what you want in the comments about that. Again, they did have two different Aerokits. So if you ever see a 996 and it has an Aerokit where this spoiler is about half the height of this and slightly less broad, that would be the Carrera Aerokit, which you could have specified as well, but again, not on a GT3. So those are the exterior changes that happened with the car. Let's jump into the inside and we'll talk about how they're trimmed down on the inside and what changes over the various years. Okay, let's talk about the interior on these cars, and let's put it out there. One of the biggest complaints about the 996s is the interior. A couple things. One, it was a radical departure from the standard 5-gauge layout that the traditional air-cooled 911 had. So it was a kind of a classic reinterpretation of that design. And frankly, they were in a financial position, and so a lot of the budget cuts, I think, came on interior materials. And in particular, you're going to see that on these early cars because they used a pretty, I'll say this politely, lower grade of plastics and vinyls in these cars. You can see how heavily texturized this is. So I would not say that the materials in this particular car are particularly pleasing. With that said, nobody buys a 996 GT3 Clubsport for pleasing interior plastics, and frankly, if they do, well, I think they might be missing some key important elements here. So because this car is a Clubsport, and we'll jump to another .1 back there to show you a couple features, you will notice some of the signature items about it being a Clubsport. Of course, the thing most people notice is the sport seats covered in Nomex. This is a fire retardant material. These, hands down, are the best factory seats I think Porsche has ever put in a car. I love these seats. I've got several cars with buckets, whether they be newer or earlier. I've got 964 RS buckets and 997 GT3 buckets and later Spider buckets, but these take the cake. I find them incredibly comfortable. You'll notice this car does have a bolster protector. That's not a factory item, but very common because these Nomex seats, because they're fabric, you can snag them or whatever. Usually they tell if a car has a factory pair of Nomex seats. You can see they do have the Porsche crest with Recaro underneath. That's usually your tell that it's a real one. A lot of times these seats go missing or got swapped out, so that would be how you would tell. They also came from the factory with Schroth 5-point belts, and you can see those here. That's how they came. In fact, one of the things I noticed about this car, and I had to pause for a second and think about it, back again, Porsche wasn't as savvy about options. In these cars, you could spec yellow belts, red belts, or blue belts at no cost. Of course, now you pay extra if you want that. And I thought, oh gosh, why'd they pick red belts on a yellow car? But it makes sense. The Schroth harnesses are always red. They don't come in multiple colors. So it looked a little weird having yellow seat belts and red harnesses. You'll also notice this car does have a full, and this is a bolt-in cage. So you'll notice it comes all the way up. It makes it a little bit challenging for a street car. Everyone's going to have their opinion on this. Me personally, I don't love the idea of driving a street car with a cage that is forward of the driver and passenger. However, this is a bolt-together cage, so you actually, if you want, you can remove the front section, which is probably what I would do if I were to be using this car on the street. So this car, you could just remove that and leave the rear section. Worth noting, the rear section cage on this car is always black. So if you see any other color other than black, it's either been refinished or it's not the cage that came in the car. In the other car over there, I'll show you what some of the other possibilities are. A couple other giveaways on a Clubsport. We do have an electrical disconnect. There's two of them. One's up in the front. I'll show you that a little bit later. But the front one is just ahead of the shifter. That's an electrical disconnect. And then, unfortunately, we don't have it present on this car because it's really hard to live with. But they did come with a mounted fire extinguisher bottle, kind of a large one that sat in the passenger floor over there. In fact, I'm going to wander over and show my camera guy. There's little disconnects in the floor for where that would normally sit. So if you pull up the carpet, there's the mount spots for where that would go on one of these cars. Pretty cool car, fairly Spartan. You could get these cars even, for example, without air conditioning or a radio. This particular car was specified with AC. The quickest way to tell if your car has AC without opening the engine lid is if you have a non-AC car, you do not get the digital climate control. You literally get a climate control with 3 knobs that came out of a Volkswagen Golf. I actually think that's kind of sexy myself, and you would just have a radio delete plate. If you do have a radio in these cars, they originally just came with the 2 dash speakers because all the GT3s just get the door pocket. They do not get the speaker in the door. While we're looking at the door, I'm going to give you one other dead giveaway that you have a Clubsport. If you look at that door panel above that door pocket, you'll notice something missing. What's missing there is our airbag. So go above the opening pocket, my camera guy, I'm going to tell him right there. You would normally have a spot where the airbag would sit, and it is missing on this car, and I'll point it out on the other car. But this is always your giveaway that you have a Clubsport, because you would have the side airbag, but because you have a full cage, they did not get side airbags. The later .2 cars look like they have the airbag, but they're electronically deactivated. So just something kind of fun to know about the Clubsport cars. Let's wander over to this other .1 car we have here in the back. I can point out some things that would be different. Over the years, they did improve the materials on the car, and then also there'll be some differences. We'll go to the passenger door so we can see some of these things. So for example, here's what it would look like if you had the airbags. Now this car, as we know, is just a factory Aerokit car. It's not a GT3. A couple giveaways, for example, it has speakers in the doors. The GT3 would not have had speakers in the doors. And then the other thing you'll notice, this car has the equipment cage, which is very, very common. And that cage is always kind of the brushed aluminum look, sort of polished. And that was available through the equipment catalog. It's a nice piece, but of course it's not a full cage. It's more of a harness bar, if you will. But you'll, of course, notice this one does have original Nomex sport seats. So those are some of the distinct differences, again, with a .1 interior. And one of the things you'll notice when we go to a .2, the interior build quality gets better. Although the one thing is, if you find a .1 and it has full leather, to me the interior feels a lot better because that tones down a lot of the texturized plastic. And midway through production, some of the early .1 cars will have kind of that gray, more hard surface plastic. I don't know exactly where the cutoff is, but you'll find some that have this interior, like this car. It's a little richer and it looks much better than the earliest of cars. But again, we are talking about cars that should be going to the track, so I'm sounding a little bit like a nitpicking Karen here. So we're gonna cut that out. Awesome cars. Let's jump into the interior on a 996.2. We got one right behind us, and we can talk about what changes with those cars, as well as you'll see a more traditional format. Okay, so this particular car, it's got black partial leather, and this has the standard sport seats, again, that would have been available in a 996 as well. Here in the US, this was the only seat we were offered. We were never offered the buckets. The rest of the world, the bucket was, you could have the bucket or you could have these if you wanted a car more for the street. Very, very common here in the US that they would have been swapped for buckets, but again, this is the configuration we would have gotten. One of the things you'll notice when you look at a .2, there's a couple really big distinctions. Again, the quality of the plastics and interior materials got better. You'll notice it has less sheen, a little bit less texture to them. They tend to hold up a little better. I still think they could stand some improvement, but I think they made a lot of strides. A couple other big things. They did increase the size of the gauges about 20%. So you'll notice the gauges are significantly larger in one of these cars. That's kind of notable. I do appreciate that. Although I sort of laugh, I never ever even look at anything other than the tach and the digital speedo. For example, I never use the actual speedo, the physical speedo. It's hard to read. But again, this car is just a partial leather car. It does not have full leather. If you're looking at one of these cars, the dead giveaway for full leather is this: the top dash will be stitched. And it's kind of nice. It kind of tones down a little bit of kind of the brightness, you know, of the plastics in here. Kind of a nice feature if we get it. A couple other things you'll notice on dashes of these cars. The standard will have these aluminum gauges. Interesting enough, one of the things I've noticed is when people photo these cars, when they photo them, they almost look white. People say, well, gosh, why does it have white gauges? They're actually aluminum, and so they should be more of a silver, but they photo oftentimes as white. But you could get these in a couple different colors. You could get them in Guards Red, you could get them in Speed Yellow, you could get them in blue. But the funny thing that Porsche did, I don't know if this was just a budget thing, I always assumed that they would have made new dials, but they don't make new dials. They take these dials and they put a sticker over the top of them. Now 20 years later, oftentimes if you ever see a car and it looks like the gauges are kind of hard to read, or the lettering looks slightly crooked or off, that sticker has started to shrink up. And it reduces the legibility, and quite frankly, it looks terrible. So the way you solve that is you basically disassemble, remove the cluster, disassemble the cluster, and then you actually take a heat gun and you very gently pull the sticker off, and lo and behold, your aluminum gauges will be behind them. So if you don't need it to be correct per the window sticker, let's say it was ordered red gauges, you would just do that, reassemble, clean, and put it back together, and it looks like new. Or I haven't seen if there's a source. My guess is somebody maybe makes new stickers for them. It seemed like a lousy cost-cutting measure. A couple other things that's kind of fun. They did have a center console option on these cars that, oddly enough, not a single car here has it. The vast majority of the cars, particularly delivered in the US, because it was a free option, you'll have a center console here that had worthless CD holders generally in it and a little cubby maybe for your wallet. I much prefer them with the center console delete, which you can do to any car. All the parts are getting kind of scarce with Porsche. I find as a taller guy, the console, it comes out at an angle and it's constantly rubbing up against the side of my right knee and drives me bonkers. And I visually just like the open console. Sort of harkens back to a 911 of yore. A couple other things that are fun with this car. It does have the carbon and aluminum shift knob. This is really the early part of the era where Porsche had figured out that, you know, options are very profitable, and so they started optioning these cars, and you could get, essentially there was 3 trim types you could get on these cars. You could get carbon fiber, you could get additional leather, or you could get aluminum. They did not offer wood on GT3s, thank you God. You won't see the huge wood kits, for example, that you'll find on the turbos or regular cars. You also note this car has the painted center console, which I think almost all the cars here but one has the painted center console. Just kind of helps break up a otherwise somewhat monotonous interior. You'll notice this car does have painted, this was an option. So the back of the sport seats are painted body color. In this case, slate gray, which is one of the more unusual colors for this car. One of the other gives on a 996 GT3 is they do not have a rear seats. So for example, you'll notice these are just where the seats would have been. You've got your little GT3 logo. And one dead giveaway that these are the original seats for a GT3 is they'll have a legal warning on them saying, these are not seats. Because I guess in the US they don't trust that we have a brain, which actually may be not too far from the truth. We like our warnings. You'll notice, you know, the warnings all over the visors. Again, the European editions did not get all these. We just have to warn you, you could die when you ride in this car. I do love that. But that's the interior. It's a business-like place to be. You know, it's certainly probably not the high point of a 996 GT3, but I find it highly functional. I find it comfortable. And unlike the previous air-cooled cars, by God, does the air conditioning work well, which I love. On that note, a lot of people ask, could you get this car without AC? Yes, you could here in the US. And again, you would get the 3 dials like you got in a Volkswagen Golf. Very unusual. I've maybe seen 3 or 4 in my lifetime. I don't know what total production is. Because again, the one problem is these cars don't ventilate particularly well. So to me, it's sort of an interesting novelty, but I don't know that I would necessarily want one. Let's jump over to this other yellow car. I'm going to show you just a couple slightly different interior trims on that car that are worth calling out. Because there's so few differences on the outside of these cars, they all got the same wheels depending on their generation. Most of the changes you'll find in cars are going to be on the interior. So this car, this is a full leather car, and you'll notice just the door panels and everything look much richer And again, that kind of tones down some of that plastic in that car. So for me, when I'm shopping for one, I really prize a car with full leather. A lot of people think, oh, it's going to add a bunch of weight. I think it adds a couple pounds, if that. But you'll notice, particularly like the instrument binnacle, just looks much nicer with that richer stitching. You'll notice this car does have carbon goodies as well, brake and shift knob, as well as the carbon door finishers. They're kind of a nice pick. This one has a larger carbon package. The other car had a smaller carbon package, so this one gets, for example, the surround, you know, around the center stack and the gauges as part of that larger package. And it has something that's you'll almost never spot, but it's my favorite option to have, and it's so silly. Again, I'm a nerd, is they offered a thicker leather steering wheel. I think it was $765. And you only really can tell when you grab it, it just has a lot more heft to it. The regular wheel feels a little bit spindly in my hands, and I love this thicker leather wheel. So for me, how this particular car was optioned, I like the additional carbon fiber. I like the thicker steering wheel. I like the painted console. We did make a couple changes to the interior of this car based on my preference. So this car did have the console. We removed that, and I think I punted it down into the dumpster because it's hideous. As well as we did install the Euro buckets in the car. And I do want to give a shout out, and she's not even a sponsor, but I think she advertises with PCA. Her name is Kim at P1 Designs. She makes these inserts for the seats. So these were originally the full leather seats, and I wanted cloth. I find that more comfortable. And so I ordered from her a pair in the Porsche Rain fabric, and I just think they're great. I sort of thought about doing yellow or something. I thought, there's already too much yellow on this particular car. But this Porsche fabric is stellar, super comfortable. You can swap them out in a matter of minutes and add some warmth to the car. I kid you not, every single car I own that has buckets has a set of inserts from Kim, so I'm just going to give her a shout out. It's great quality stuff. I do love them. So that's the interior on a Dot 2, and from there we're going to jump up into the front trunk. Okay, let's talk about the front trunk. Who thinks a front trunk could be that interesting? But I find it kind of interesting. One of the things I do radically prefer on a Dot 1 car is why Porsche went away from this, I'll never know. They have an old-fashioned lever that opens it. Oh, it's so nice. It feels nice. You pull on it, bang, it opens. The later Dot 2 has an electrical one, which just causes a whole litany of problems. There was nothing wrong with just activating a cable, but they had to come up with some new engineering idea. So let's talk about the front trunk on these. Funny enough, what I complain about on the interior of a Dot 1, I will also complain about the interior of the trunk. The interior of the trunk kind of carries back to, think back to like the 3.2 Carrera. In my video, I complained about the cheap Perlon they got at Home Depot. I swear the same treatment applies in the front trunk of these cars. I mean, this reminds me of the carpet that Vu and I used to use to make speaker boxes back in the 90s when we did car stereo competitions. You could buy it by the yard for 10 bucks. Very functional. One thing you'll note with any of these cars, none of them got a spare tire. You actually could fit a spare tire. You could use the same one that was used, for example, in the Carrera 4 if you want to add one, but they never came with one. We'll walk over and I'll show you what comes in there. But basically, this is what the trunk looks like. They're going to have the cheaper style Perlon carpet in a Dot 1. And because it's a Club Sport, this is your additional electrical release. So that's one of your other giveaways, that you have a Dot 1 Club Sport is there. A couple things when we're in here we want to call out is the option code stickers. These cars did come with option code stickers. So let's jump in here and see what we've got. So we always start on these cars. It shows us the car's VIN number, and it shows us the model type. So if you're ever wondering, is it a real GT3? Every single GT3 is going to have the same model number, 996.810. Again, they didn't give a distinct model number for the Club Sport, which is one of the reasons that we have a hard time finding production numbers, because it's simply an option code. The only other model that's a street car, Cup cars got their own, would be the RS, and that would be a 996.850, I believe. That's right off the top of my head. But let's talk about what some of these other codes mean here. At L12H, that would be the color code. That would be Speed Yellow. We'll dive in that in the car next door. 87 would be the interior color code or content code. That's a little distinct because it has the cloth. And then we're going to talk about some other important things. So C, and then whatever comes next, that tells you the original country of origin. So this car is a C00. If you remember anything else, the center of the Porsche world is Germany. So every car that's 00 is a German fatherland product, if you will. For example, here in the US, we would either be CO2 or CO3. CO2 would be everywhere outside of California. And in prior years, where they had a distinct California edition, that would have been called a C03. So most commonly sold in Germany, but were commonly sold in countries like Switzerland, C10. I think Japan, I want to say C7 if they're left-hand drive. But again, just off the top of my head, you can look all this stuff up. So one of the things I know is okay, this car started life in Germany, and then this code, I think it's hard to read, XBJ maybe, that is the, I believe, the roll cage, not the roll cage, the harness bar, or the belts, and then the next one is for the cage itself. And then the most important option code, 003. This tells me that this car is a legitimate club sport. And it'll give me a few other option codes. For example, these are your cloth sport seats, your air conditioning and radio prep. So pretty lightly optioned car, but that tells me it's a legit club sport car. So those are the things you want to look for in the trunk. We'll talk about accessories in a moment. Let's wander over to this car. And again, I'm going to close this because I'm going to just show you my complaint. Porsche, I'm sure you care a lot, but one of your dumber ideas, they don't have very many dumb ideas. I'm kind of a fanboy, but this is a dumb idea. So they have these silly electrical switches. They like to get glitchy. So a couple things to know about these glitchy switches. In your owner's manual, so if you ever have a situation where it doesn't open or your battery is dead, please, please, please read your owner's manual. It will give you a couple solutions. Number one is there is a post that pulls out of the fuse box. Pretty straightforward. I might as well show it to you because we're here. You simply remove your fuse box cover, and there is a post right here that pulls out. This is your positive, so take your jump box, put a positive lead here, and then grab a ground. I generally find your best ground is your door striker here. So it takes kind of long, but your jumper cables, so positive here, and then actuate your switch. Sometimes you got to work to get a good ground, but it will work as long as your battery has even a minimal amount of power. The next thing the manual will tell you is there is actually a release to open the trunk remotely. It's a little bit of a pain. It's in one of the fender liners. Just for security reasons, I won't put it on this video, but it is in your owner's manual. I know it sounds crazy to actually read that, but I would encourage it. So that is a little bit how you get in your trunk in a gotcha moment. So let's open the trunk here. To cut to the chase and make it more interesting for us, I did remove the liner because I want to show you what to look for when you're inspecting one of these cars. But let's start with the option code sticker on this car again. You'll notice again, 996.810. It's a GT3. We'll notice CO2. That means that car was delivered here in the US. And then these would be our option codes. There's several tools online. You can go decode what these options mean. And these would tell you, for example, that it has the large carbon package, that it came with full leather, those kinds of things. That would be how you would decide what options came on your car. If it's missing on a GT3 you're looking at, in general, they also should be in the maintenance book. We'll cover that in a moment. But a really good tool for knowing how your car was delivered new. Because I always like to inspect cars, show people how they work, I did remove the trunk carpet. This is not hard to do, so if you're going to spend the potentially six-figure money you're going to pay for a GT3, take the time, and this will help decide if you've ever had any accident, damage, or repair. So you'll notice that these do have a fog of color in them, but they are not completely painted. So one of the giveaways of a car that's had significant body repair, if the paint in the trunk looks as good as it does on the outside of the car, that's problematic. On the flip side, if it's completely unpainted, that's also problematic. And this is how the factory does it. You can see the spot welds, you can see the seam sealer, and you should, because this is, I mean, these cars were built so nicely, you can see how straight and perfect all of this is. This is a reference standard for what it should look like when you open up one of these trunks. Pretty easy. And then you'll also have a secondary sticker with your color code tag. So it takes all of maybe 5 minutes to pull out this trunk liner. If you're considering a car, please take the time to pull that out and fully inspect the car. On a similar note, I also encourage people pull out these panels. I forgot to loosen those for the video, so we won't do that. But in particular, what I want to do is I want to look in here and I want to see evidence of that my drains are clear. I want to make sure there's no evidence of rodents. If you're going to find a rodent in one of these cars, which are common, they're generally going to be up here in the front. So what you're looking for is, frankly, rodent droppings, and usually they'll have little bits of insulation, nuts, things like that. Trust me, you do not want rodents in your car. I'm also generally looking at the battery to make sure it's got a hold down. They should have a correct hold down here, as well as a battery vent. So it should be vented, and make sure my terminals are clean. And most batteries will have a date code on them so you can determine their age. I get a lot of questions about batteries, which battery is appropriate in these cars. Frankly, any good quality battery I'm okay with. There's only a few battery manufacturers in the world. Most of the time, if you go to a Porsche dealer, they generally won't put a Porsche battery in, they'll put an Interstate, but it does vary dealer to dealer. I'm a big fan of the Interstate, it works fine. You can also go with a lightweight battery if you so choose. You could save a little bit of weight that way, but I would definitely, unless you live somewhere really cold or you have some particular reason, there's a couple sizes. I would go with an H6 size. There's no need to go to the larger H7, and there's tie downs for 2 different size batteries. So that's kind of my thought on batteries. A few little last minute things. Hood shocks on these cars often fail. Please don't be that person who's getting bonked on the head. These are literally, I always say, if you're drunk and have one arm, it would take you 30 seconds to change these, and they're super cheap, and you'll feel accomplished. You're like, I worked on my own car. You'll notice too, on an original car, they'll have a little bit of old school paint protection film in the corners right here. So one way to tell you have an original hood is they'll have these little, again, it's kind of funny why they did that. I think it's because they must have thought that it was going to chafe, maybe somewhere in here, and so they applied, and you'll find that on all original cars. So it's kind of a good tell that the hood's original and hasn't really been mucked with. Although I've had people peel them off because it said, oh, there's a weird sticker on my car. I'm like, no, that's original. That's how they come. Let's wander over. I'm going to show you what I pulled out of the trunk here so you can kind of see what typically belongs in a trunk. So, and there are some differences between a .1 and the .2 car trunk. So for giggles, this is what we pulled out. So this is just the front trunk liner. They do have a little false floor that covers all this. One of my pet peeves, they always get bent if you look at them. So you can actually re-bend them. I get petty about stuff like that, but I wanted to sit right. So again, this is what's in a .2, was delivered here in the US. We got less stuff than they did. Again, no spare tire, but if you want to put a spare tire in one, you can get a kit out of a 996, take this foam piece out, and there's still the securing point for a spare down there, believe it or not, just like it would be in a turbo. But instead we got the compressor, we got a bottle of goo, or prayer card I jokingly call it, which I would personally never use. Harkening back to our old school days, you do get a set of OFX gloves for keeping your hands clean. Do always make sure you have the wheel lock key. I run into this all the time, wheel lock key's missing. So we actually here in the shop, we always put a sticky note and label them to the exact car they belong to so that we don't miss them. You get an interchangeable screwdriver, one open-ended wrench, a tow hook, which the tow hook on these cars, there is one screwed into the front bumper and there is one on the rear bumper. And we have this fun, handy-dandy little tool that no one seems to know what this is. This actually is what releases your headlights. So you'll notice when we had that trunk out, there's a little black plug there. You pull that plug out, you turn this, and it releases your headlights. So super easy to pull the headlight out on this car. So for example, if you're going to be cleaning your car or polishing on it, don't spend 10 minutes taping the headlight, just pop it out. And that tool should be in your toolkit. In the US, I don't know about in Europe, but my guess is this is true. They came with a front plate bracket. Thank God this was never installed on that car. I think no state should require that, but every state, or many states do. And then your other really, really useful tool, particularly on a PCCB car, and these were included, this car is a locator, so when you remove a wheel, what I want to tell you to do is you pull off your first lug nut and you screw this in, and then when you pull your wheel off, your wheel slides on this little pin tool and you can't have it impact your rotor. Not such a big deal on a steel rotor car, but on a carbon ceramic car that could damage irreparably your rotor. So that's why Porsche was so kind as to include that. You'll notice our kit here in the US has a couple blank spots. So what the heck goes in there? Well, let's jump to the .2 kit. The .2 kit, or the .1 kit, is this. So this is the .1 kit, and what's different is these were delivered in Europe. This was originally a German market car, and in Germany they were required to supply you a first aid kit as well as a warning triangle, which is this here. So that's what those spots are for. This particular car, I thought, oh, how nice, they gave you a tire pressure gauge. I actually think it should still have a tow hook, but I did like how that gauge fits in there nice. I think this particular car is missing its tow hook. It does have its wheel lock key, but it's missing its screwdriver, very commonly missing. The good news is that's cheap, and again, it's not the hill I'm going to die on, but it's kind of fun to know what originally came in the front trunk. Okay, one of the fun things about me making these videos is I'm blessed. I tend to have a lot of these cars at my disposal that I have access to, and the one car I was hoping to have for my video, which I just couldn't round one up, is my holy grail 996 GT3, and this would be a 996.2 GT3 RS. So we're going to have to pretend, although PCA did a pretty good video, I think with Bob Miller, they talk a little bit about the GT3 RS compared, I believe, to a Cup car, so do check that out on our YouTube channel. But if you're looking for a GT3 RS, there's going to be a couple really easy spotter guide. The #1 spotter's guide is for the only time in the history that Porsche has ever produced an RS product, it only came in one color. So you better like white. Thankfully I like white, so they're all Carrara white, and their only difference will be graphics. They'll either be blue wheels and blue graphics or red graphics and red wheels. That's the only visual distinction. Way you're going to tell is they actually, for budgetary reasons, they didn't make a new front bumper cover. They literally just cut out the vents in the front cover. So you'll see that on an RS. They'll have the vents cut out of them. Same exact wheels, except for they'll be finished in blue or red. They will have a carbon fiber hood. It's a little harder to tell on the outside, except they will not have this pretty Porsche badge. It will be a sticker on an RS. The other dead giveaway, if you ever go look at one and you're shopping for one, that carbon oftentimes fails along with the paint. So if it looks like it's blistering, sadly that's probably correct, and that's just very, very common. In fact, I tried to buy one at Amelia, it was a couple years ago. I really regret not keeping my bid going. I kind of went over my budget, and I always tell people stick to your budget, and I try to be honest to my words, and I really regret not buying that car. A very low mileage car, and it did have some of that blistering. They will have the carbon fiber mirror caps. That will be sort of a giveaway. And then when you look on the inside of the car, they will be dressed out much like that Clubsport will be. So they will have the Nomex seats, the cage, and so on. So those will be sort of the giveaways. And then going to the back of the car, they'll actually have a plexiglass rear window. Actually, it's one of the fun things when you drive one of those cars at speed, you look in the rearview mirror and you can actually watch the mirror moving, or not the mirror, the window, because it's so thin. I love it. And then where it gets really cool is they did not get a different motor, but they did get some important changes. The single biggest change that they have is they have kind of a ram air effect. So they have a carbon rear lid that has slightly different intakes here, and it creates a massive amount of air intake, or kind of a ram air effect. So they're rated at the same 381 horsepower, but real world, I think they probably make more like 410, and you'll never really know because you can't put one on a dyno that will effectively test them. But I'm here to tell you, when you drive the car, it's notable. The other change they made is they have different cylinder heads on them. They're ported and polished. Again, Porsche quoted the same power. Seems like a lot of work to get the same power. They did it for homologation reasons. I think real world, it's a much stronger car. They lost about 110 pounds in the translation, and the suspension setup is slightly better, slightly stiffer shocks. They've got different wheel carriers. You can dial in more camber on them. They're just super trick. I guess I'm going on and on because I'm hoping someone's going to watch this video and say, I want to bless Nathan with one. I'd like an all original, low mileage, blue graphic car. So if you have one, reach out. I'm your buyer. Awesome car. I could go on for days about that. One of the things that's kind of funny, I just rattle on with these videos. I forgot I had this 997 GT3 in the background, and earlier I told you my favorite wing is the taco wing, and I have never noticed this, but I'm kind of thinking the later 997 GT3 wing kind of looks kind of like the taco. Sort of interesting. So I guess this is my vote saying the .1's the better looking spoiler. So call me crazy, but Porsche seems to have a little bit gone back to it. I guess I have a bias. And here I am begging for an RS, and it doesn't have the tacos. So I guess either one is good. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they're just simply great cars. I want to touch on another topic. And another topic is, a lot of times in my videos, I get accused of being a purist because I tell people This is how the cars were delivered, and I talk about things like paint and accessories. And I want to make it clear, I always encourage people, please drive and use the car as is interesting for you, for your intended use case. A loved Porsche is the best Porsche. So in these cars, that generally means use the car as Porsche intended, and that's at the track. So our next car in the background, which we really haven't touched on yet, is this black car. And this car belongs to a local friend of mine. This is a track car. This car is used as the engineers envisioned this car would. And so I'm going to show you kind of a pretty typical example of what you might find a car that's been set up for the track. So a couple things that are notable, and then we'll bring it down on the ground and point out some of these changes. But obviously, wheel fitment and tires can be a really big dead giveaway. You can see what he's running for rubber on this car. You know, he's got wheel studs on it. And you'll notice something that's really, really common. This car originally was optioned with Porsche carbon ceramic brakes. We're going to talk about that just a little bit. But a lot of people were afraid about wear on rotors, and so this has originally the calipers from a PCCB, and it's got gyro disc rotors, which is a really good setup for a track car. Again, no issues with a car at the track. What you're just going to want to do if a car has spent life at the track, a couple things you just want to keep in mind. Like any car, inspect it. You're going to inspect it for wear, just like a street car. A track car is no different. Oftentimes they get a higher level of service. I actually can get nervous at cars that spent their whole life just sitting, and someone says, oh, I didn't need to service it because it only has 5,000 miles, and you find out everything's original. That's not good either. But again, they do get a harder use case on them. So in particular, I'm going to be looking for things like accident damage, that kind of thing. That's kind of what panics me about the cars. The motors themselves, crazy robust, so I'm not so worried about that. And from a value standpoint, again, generally, track cars will trade for a discount, but that doesn't mean it's not a great car. Again, if you're going to use one, that's a great way to buy a car. We're going to lower this car a little bit. I'll talk about some of the mods topside on them, but a really fun car to go drive in anger. And the cool thing about this car, I'm telling you, if you're at a PCA driving event and you're driving one of these cars and you're doing well, it means you can actually drive. The modern ones, this frankly is going to get killed on the track by any of the more modern equipment, but you're not 100% certain that's a better driver doing that work there, because this car, it takes a skilled driver to extract its full performance potential. So we'll drop it and we'll look topside at some other fun stuff. Okay, we just looked underneath this car. Let's open the door. I'm going to point out some of the mods that have been made to this car. Pretty typical track car setup. And again, setup is so highly individualized by the owner, what kind of venue they want to use it, what their skill and experience is, who their shop is going to be if they're going to work with a local shop. So a lot of that's going to depend on that. So I'm not going to get into particular setups in terms of suspension or modifications, but this just shows a pretty typical example of how they were used in period, and frankly, how some of them are still being used, although sadly less and less. I can't remember the last time I went out and there were bunches of these cars. I do remember going out 20 years ago and they just owned the place. So you'll see changes. For example, this car was originally delivered with the standard sport seats. It's got a Sparco driver's seat. We got a 5-point harness, safety devices cage in this car. So this is a more significant cage than, for example, the equipment harness bar that's in my car. That's okay, but if I'm going to do more serious track work, I want a more robust cage setup. Of course, he's got his camera mount. And you'll notice those canisters in the back, those are the Moton, those are the remote reservoirs for the suspension. Pretty nice, so you can adjust on the fly. Well, not on the fly per se, but during the course of the day, looking at conditions and how things are going, you can make adjustments to the car. Pretty neat setup. Of course, has the quick release steering wheel. I never mind getting that airbag out of my face and getting something a little bit smaller when I'm doing track work. For the road, I'm a fan of having an airbag, but at the track, I think this is a pretty good setup. But again, I'm showing this car because I think it harkens back to how I remember people using these cars, and I loved going out and seeing them in action. Just so exciting to see in motion. And again, this is a truly great driver's car. There's a couple things about this car that's unique versus any other GT3. It's the only GT3 that has no electronic nannies other than ABS. So this car does not have Porsche stability management. It certainly doesn't have PASM. It doesn't have dynamic chassis control or active engine mounts or rear axle steer. But even something as simple as it has a true one-to-one steering rack. It's not variable. So it's got a very linear feel to the steering. In fact, I would argue these probably have the best steering feel versus any of the GT cars, but they do have the lightest steering feel, and they're a car, they're definitely a slow in, fast out car. You definitely need to load the front wheels on these cars. If anything, they come from the factory with a fair amount of understeer. They can feel a little bit skittish to a lot of people. You have to brake real deep and hit them slow and come out fast. We'll do a little driving later, but that's one of the things that'll strike you about this car. They've got a little 225 front section tire on an 8 or 8.5 inch wheel when they're original. And so front end grip is kind of at a premium in this car. And so you kind of got to learn how to load those up. And that's kind of what makes driving this car fun. It rewards learning how to drive. I would not suggest this be someone's first track car. Get yourself a Spec Miata, big fan of those. But just a brilliant, brilliant car from that regard. So pretty typical. And again, don't avoid a car that's been used at the track unless you specifically want like a pristine car to take to the concours or something. A lot of fun. So let's jump to engine compartments and look at a couple things on the top side. Then we're going to put a more original car up on the lift and show you some things to look at underneath there. Okay, we're going to look top side of it at a .1, then we'll jump over to a .2. One thing that's also fun about these cars is you actually have an engine, you can see something. And the modern cars, it almost breaks my heart to even open the quote engine lid and just see the fans there and where you can add a little bit of oil if you so choose. I like the fact that we have an actual engine bay. It's pretty crowded in here, but if we're looking at one of these cars, again, I don't ever do in-depth PPI videos because I'm a fan of using a professional to do that. But if I'm looking at one of these cars, what are some of the things that I'm going to be looking for? Couple things that are notable. You'll see some people change out the air boxes. I'm here to tell you the factory air box on this car flows incredibly well. They didn't redesign it for any of the subsequent models. And so you're not going to gain more power with some gigantic aftermarket airbox. I promise you're not. So don't bother with that. What I'm going to look for generally when I'm looking in here would just be any evidence of leaks, anything that's like, frayed belts or evidence of rodents, things like that, that I'm going to get my flashlight out. I'm going to look in all the nooks and crannies. And then, of course, the other thing I'm going to be looking for, and this is probably more important when it's on the lift, but I'm looking at all, for example, where my engine mounts and my rear corners to make sure I can't see any evidence that it's had any kind of accident damage, that sort of thing. Because what I always tell people is, well, I'm irritated if I buy a car and I have to put a new alternator in it or I have to solve an oil leak. I can solve that. If the car's had a hard collision to the right corner and it's crooked, I can't really solve that, or not to any reasonable measure. So the things I'm always most importantly inspecting for are the things that I can't change. A couple things I'll call out. All these cars do have a part number for the rear engine lid. So you can see them here. These are built by a company called Turnwald. So you can see with the part number, again, verifying that as an original rear lid. Pretty uncommon that you'll find a replica on a GT3 unless there was probably significant accident damage. But I've seen a fair amount of replica ones on, non-GT cars, or someone frankly wants this kind of look to it. If you jump over to the .2 car, from an aesthetic standpoint, you're going to find almost no difference because the motor didn't fundamentally change. Internals changed on the car, which is how they went from 360 horsepower to 381. But in terms of what you're going to see topside on the car, it doesn't get a new intake, or it doesn't get anything that you're really going to pick out, there. You will see that the manufacturer of the lid, on a .2 is different, and of course you'll see a different part number. They went from being made in Germany to Switzerland. Nothing major, but again, kind of nice that you have an actual engine compartment that you can open and see mechanical items in them. Again, it just breaks my heart when I can't see them. I guess although I own a lot of mid-engine Porsches and that doesn't bother me, maybe because I know I can't see it without doing some work. But there's engine topside. We're going to move some cars around. We're going to put this car up on the lift and we're going to get underneath it. Great, now we're jumping underneath the 996 GT3, and much like my other videos you see when we get at this point in the video, this again is not a pre-purchase inspection. It's just things that you should know, or if you're looking underneath ones, things to pay attention to before you take it to a shop. And so I want to make it really, really clear. Whatever GT3 you're going to buy represents a significant investment of money and more than just emotional energy. So you might as well get a good car. So I would highly encourage a pre-purchase inspection by a knowledgeable, well-respected Porsche independent shop to look at this car. And I do emphasize independent because a lot of people think of the dealers. More of the experience with these cars now they're 20 years old lies in the hands of independents, particularly those that do a lot of track prep. They have a lot of experience with these cars and they're going to know what to be looking for. So much like any car, there's some common themes with any car I'm going to look at. There'll be a couple things that are specific to the GT3. So just starting at the back, what I generally am doing is just making note of anything that stands out. So the first thing that stands out to me on this car is this car should have had machined exhaust tips. Not a big deal, but I know that those are not original. Those look like they've probably been powder coated black. Someone probably just wanted that aesthetic because they are the original tips, but you'll note they should originally be silver on one of these cars. I also make note it has car graphic mufflers on it right here. Actually, these sound fabulous. They're very well made. I believe they're made in Germany. Muffler on this car, and they're post-cat, so they would still be emissions legal, sort of uncork a little bit of extra sound on that car, so that's good. These cars are not particularly prone to oil leaks except at the rear main seal, but I do always want to get a good light out, and I'm going to be looking for any evidence of leaks, particularly like things like cylinder head base gaskets, valve cover gaskets, timing chain cover, any of those kind of areas. And again, I'm just looking for any evidence of leaks. This car is really dry. It's a very, loved on car. But loved on cars can leak too. And frankly, some non-loved cars don't leak. So sometimes you just get lucky. But again, these don't have a large propensity for oil leaks except typically at the rear main seal. And one of the reasons they like to leak at the rear main seal, and this car is nice and dry, and Porsche did a couple different iterations of that rear main, but no, this one looks great. They leak a lot less if you drive them, so this is an encouragement. It's a great car to drive. Get out and drive your darn car. I just noticed this, and this brings up a lot of conversation. Porsche, the original Mezger-based engine cases were built in Germany. Later, they subbed them off to a vendor that was in Spain, and there's a bunch of brouhaha made that a German-built case is going to be worth more or it's better. That's all hogwash. Yes, it looks nice if it says made in Germany, but I 100% guarantee if Porsche specified it from a vendor, it met their quality control standards. And that's the same case that, for example, was used in the GT3 RS 4 liters. So I lose zero sleep over that, but we like to get a little bit pedantic in the Porsche world. You'll find your engine number here. So if you're looking to verify it's got its original engine, you'll find it there. Some cars have had a hard life. You'll actually find this is one of the lower points on the back of the car. You'll actually find they've run aground here at the center of the case. You'll find every so often they'll be like literally almost ground off. That'll give you some evidence the car's had a hard life. One of the things I always like to look for is one of the biggest indicators cars had a rear accident damage is a lot of times this heat shielding in the bumper is damaged or missing. So they always should have a heat shield in the bumper. If you don't, you will warp your bumper cover. But oftentimes this gets damaged, they put a new bumper cover on and they don't replace those things. So I'm looking for worn fasteners, missing fasteners, things like that. But overall, other than the car graphic mufflers and the black tips, it looks to be all original under here. And again, I'm okay with modifications. I just generally want to know what they are. Same with suspension on this car. This car appears to have all its original suspension components. These are adjustable for ride height. I can post up a link in the video if you'd like showing what factory height is on these cars. But essentially the .1 cars can sit, I think they come from the factory 3 millimeters lower than the .2 cars front and rear, but they have more adjustability or more range of acceptability in the front. So they can sit as much as 13 millimeters lower than a .2, which is pretty low. In fact, this Clubsport here, I would argue, is probably functionally too low. So for what it's worth, that's something I would pay attention to. Rear suspension height is measured from this point here to the ground. And again, I can post up that specification. So that's where it's at for the rear. Transmission numbers are here. These are a G9696 is the transmission in these cars. And then that would be your production number of the transmission itself. One change between a .1 and a .2 is the .2 has an external oil cooler for the transmission. The .1 transmission does not have that. So that's one sort of dead giveaway if you're underneath the car, that you're underneath a .2. Okay, coming back, these do not have a complete floor like some of the newer cars. And I'm just looking for anything that's notable, like this car. I've got a little piece of plastic here that's actually broken, so I'm going to put that on my to-buy list. And you can see what happened. These are really low. It obviously hit some sort of rock or item in the road. Again, it's not going to damage the car, but I'll make a note and I'm actually going to order one of these pieces from Porsche, because I hate stuff like that. One of your other giveaways of cars been spent time at the track. These will all be just coated in rubber bits and cracked oftentimes if they've hit a curb at speed, that kind of thing. Again, not a problem, but just something I'm looking for. And again, they came from the factory with just overspray underneath here. They weren't completely finished out. So for example, you can see they didn't lay underneath and paint them. So if you ever look under one and these are perfectly painted, it's had repair work done to it. So I want to know that. That's what I'm really looking for. Moving to the front here, common things I generally see. I'm always going to look at the inside of the wheels looking for damage. They tend to get a lot of damage on the inside. Give me an opportunity to see kind of what's going on here. And I'm just looking for anything that stands out. I can see, for example, that they're original wheels. I can see the part number through the spokes. It starts with a 996 in there. So I know, okay, that's an original wheel. I can also look at the tires at this point. A lot of times on the ground, people just look at the tires on this edge. They're always going to wear on the inside, so I'll have a sense of if the car is wearing tires or not. A little hard to tell on this car because these are almost, brand new with almost zero wear. In terms of suspension front ride height, it's measured from here. So this would be your measurement point for suspension height from the front. These brake ducts are almost always missing. They're kind of a little bit flimsy. They like to get torn off. In fact, this one's a little looser than I'd like it to be. I'll take a look at that when I get some time. And then because these cars sit so unbelievably low, these front bumper covers almost always take some impact. This has had a little bit here, you can see that. Nothing terrible, but it did dent the pan ever so slightly. And then these lips, consider them a disposable use item, although they've really ratcheted the price up on these things. So they used to be like dirt cheap. There's some aftermarket ones. I've never found them to fit particularly well. I guess I'm a purist. But if you are going through a bunch of them, I guess you could try that route. But again, pretty darn reliable cars. There are a couple other topics that are kind of hotbeds on these cars. Number one is coolant lines. A lot of people say you absolutely have to weld or pin the lines. A couple things I'll say. I'm not going to take a particular position on whether you should weld or pin. I'm going to let you decide. What I always encourage people is have a good relationship with a shop that you trust and believe in your local area. Support them, have a relationship with them, and if they're confident recommending an answer and they're in good stead in the Porsche world, I would probably trust them versus some guy talking on YouTube. So that's my opinion on that. My other opinion is it depends on your use case for the car. So if your car is like the black car we were talking about, it's regularly going on the track, I believe that car should be remedied in some fashion, whether that be welding or pinning. For a street-driven car, my opinion is I would only make that change when I was pulling the motor for some other reason. So let's say it's due for a clutch, the motor's coming out. At that point, a lot of the labor is already out of the way. I would probably remedy the car at that point. And the reason I would do that is the risk of it failing on the road in a street-driven situation, as long as you're paying reasonable attention, is inconvenience. So if a line blows off when you're driving, it's very obvious. You pull to the side of the road and you shut the car off, and it's flatbedded to a shop. So a little bit inconvenient, but not that common. However, if it happens on the track, it's a safety issue. And so in that situation, it's worth making the repair. So again, if you're going to pull the clutch out or pull the motor to do a clutch, I would probably make the repair at that time. On a related note to that would be clutch. So you notice one of the big differences mechanically between a Clubsport and a regular .1 or between a regular GT3 and a GT3 RS is the lightweight clutch and flywheel. Pros and cons. The lightweight clutch and flywheel, one, it's super cool to say at Cars and Coffee you got one, so there's bragging rights. Two, it has less rotational mass, so the engine spins up more quickly. Also, so it makes it a little easier to get your rev match. The motor just feels like it gains probably 15 horsepower. It's a nice seat of the pants feeling. The two biggest drawbacks, you will get a significant amount of gear rattle at idle, if that bothers you. Some people, they like it, so just neither here nor there, you're going to get that. And the other thing is it becomes much trickier to drive, for example, in stop and go traffic. So if the car does kind of dual duty of maybe occasionally you're driving into the office and you're sitting in high traffic. I'm in Seattle, we have lots of traffic here. I find the lightweight clutch and flywheel cars to be super irritating in traffic because it just takes paying more attention. The dual mass car is a little bit forgiving. So again, depends on your use case whether you want to go that route or not. The next hotbed topic mechanically on these cars is overrevs. So a couple things about overrevs. These cars are not as smart as the modern car, so they only record two ranges, range 1 and a range 2. These engines are massively overbuilt. They're really good for upwards of 9,000 RPM. Dot 1s are redlined, I think it's 7,800, 8,200 for dot 2s, and RS is 8,300 RPM, I believe. I don't lose a lot of sleep on overrevs, although I do run an overrev report. I will show you what that looks like. As long as the overrev was well in the past, I personally don't lose a ton of sleep on it. However, I will tell you the market somewhat panics. So if you're worried about potentially resale value, if I have a car that has a overrev report that doesn't look particularly favorable, you'll get a lot of blowback from potential buyers. And so that is something to consider from a valuation standpoint. I think likely unfair. The only reason I would really panic about a bad one is if it was really ugly and all the ugly was recent. That would give me some insight about how the car was used or cared for. But if I have an overrev and the last stage 2 is 200 or 300 hours ago, I'm losing less than 0 sleep as long as the car checks out mechanically healthy. So those are kind of some basic things under the car. We'll talk a little bit about some data and knowledge and information, but before I do that, I almost forgot. I want to talk, before we break this, talk about brakes real quick. So essentially you can put the brakes on these cars into basically 3 categories. The dot 1 cars, they had a 4-piston caliper. They went to a 6-piston caliper in the dot 2. So the dot 2 cars do have a better braking system than the dot 1s. Although for everything except for the most outrageous situation, the dot 1 brakes are perfectly capable. I wouldn't upgrade them for the vast majority of people, but there is a running change. And then the other big change, Porsche for the GT2 introduced the Porsche carbon ceramic brake. It was never available on a dot 1. It was introduced starting with model year 2004 on the GT3, and you can see an example of that on this particular car. Somewhere about 25% of the cars were specified with Porsche carbon ceramic brakes. They're not without their controversies, so I'll give you the basic overview. People like them for a couple of reasons. 1, there's bragging rights. 2, it's kind of distinctive with the yellow caliper. 3, I kind of like all the stainless hardware. They just hold up and look better if you're kind of a pretty car person like I am, or going to the concours. In terms of how they feel, to me they have better initial bite than a standard steel brake car, but you know, the steel brake cars are phenomenally great. I think the one thing people really like is the no brake dust. That's a big deal. But here are the drawbacks. The drawbacks are replacement costs are very, very high on these. Porsche basically called them lifetime. For a street car that's driven moderately, that might be true because of course none of these cars get a ton of miles. However, at some point, if you have to replace a rotor, it's going to be stratospherically expensive. They are fragile, so that's one of the reasons I suggested if you're going to, for example, remove a wheel, please use the locating pin tool, which will keep you from dropping the wheel on the rotor itself. And again, most people that run these cars at the track, just like this black car was originally specified with PCCBs, they switch to a steel gyro disc rotor, which is probably kind of a sweet spot. You safely pack these away, put them up on your shelf, and then, you know, if you ever take it back strictly to street use or you're going to resell the car, you could reinstall the original carbon ceramic rotors. The calipers can be used on either, so a lot of people wonder about that. Calipers you can use either way. So I'm a fan. I prefer a car with carbon brakes on it, but it's not the hill I'm going to die on. I'm all about quality of the car overall. So let's jump into some accessories and features, some information. We'll wander back over to my toolbox. I'll show you a few things that I find pretty helpful for these cars. And we already covered what comes in the trunk, but let's cover a few other items that would come with the car. I'm a big fan of having the window sticker. So this is the window sticker on the car that we've just looked at here. These cars had a base price right at $100,000. Seems like quite a bargain with our new inflationary environment. And you can see how this car was optioned originally right at just shy of $114,000. Funny enough, that won't even buy you a base 992 in today's world. Even though this car is pretty well optioned, you can see the options. One of the things to know is that if you don't have your original window sticker, oftentimes other services will get your build information wrong. And so it's really important that you actually do the work to find out how your car was optioned. I was recently looking at a car that actually was a really cool and unusual build, and the print off they got from Porsche wasn't accurate and didn't account for a lot of those options. So kind of a bummer. So if you ever wonder how you figure that out, there's a couple things that are sort of useful. You can find this online. This is the original order guide for these cars. So this, of course, is just for US cars. You can see, you know, what the original price was. It tells you what was standard equipment. For example, you know, if you wanted air conditioning, you had to select option code 573. It was no charge. So an AC delete car would just not have option 573. But it shows you, you know, what was optional for colors. Speaking of colors, kind of fun, I just wrote some notes in here. So for example, of the US cars that they built, 130 of them were black, 70 were Carrera white, 84 guards red, 113 speed yellow. So your most common colors, silver, black, speed yellow, guards red, and white are your top 5. So sort of an interesting, these 4 colors were free. These ones were the kind of your standard optional metallic colors. But for example, only one person picked dark teal metallic. Kind of interesting. So that car is going to do quite well, even though they only paid $825 for it. But funny enough, not a single person ordered forest green metallic. Go figure that one out. Thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, as an example, we have a Slate Grey car here. It's one of the 13 cars in Slate Grey. But you can actually, and it shows, you know, how all the options are. So this is kind of a fun thing to play with. I noted 258 cars got full leather. Almost everything's black. Only these, now again, these are US cars, or North American, which includes Canadian. 34 had natural gray, 15 had natural brown. I love natural brown. So yeah, kind of fun, but you can see what all the different options are. 272 cars had Porsche carbon ceramic brakes, $8,150. Again, you seatbelts, you could pick your color and they were free. Maybe Porsche will watch my video and think, this guy, he's onto something. Maybe we should give away a few free options every so often. But again, you can see what the options were. So if you want to know, if you know your car's original MSRP, you can kind of work backwards and kind of figure out how it was spec'd. So this is kind of a useful tool. The other couple things I find kind of useful are the Adrian Streether has a book. It's not specific to the 993 or the GT3, but it's on the 996. It's a really good book. And the other one is, this is issue 5 of 000 magazine. Has a very deep dive on the 996 GT3. One of the best articles I've seen written about these cars. I really enjoyed reading that. So that's a sort of a good resource, if you will. And then a couple things that come with your car. Again, here's the original brochure, also useful. I love having those. You can find these on eBay. They originally came with an owner's manual and a kind of a chintzy vinyl pouch. The 2 most important things that would come in that would be your maintenance book, which would have a secondary copy of your option code sticker. So if it's missing under hood, it should be here. Isn't always, but that's sort of, but again, it'll tell you how your car was optioned. It'll tell you where your car was originally delivered. So this car came out of Houston, Texas. And then, if you're really lucky, your maintenance book will be stamped. This one happens to be. A note to my friends in Germany. In Germany, they always stamp the books, and I love you. You're my people. In America, generally, most dealers no longer stamp books, and they really haven't for the past 30 years. So sometimes I'll have a German client, and they'll say, oh, how come the books aren't stamped? And they'll be very upset. In the U.S., the culture is that we collect generally the service information in paper format, which I would always recommend any of my fellow Porsche files do. Please keep a file of everything that's happened to your car. It only behooves you and adds value to your car. And even people like me, sometimes I forget what I've done with a given car. So super useful to keep that information. Owner's manual. Keys. So this is the style key that came with the car. The cars were delivered with 3 keys, 2 like this, and then they had a valet key, which was not a remote key. These keys, frankly, are pretty low quality, like the rest of the 996 interior, and they do like to fail. One of the things I always tell people is when you're going to go inspect one of these cars, first ask if they have both keys, because they're expensive to replace, and then test both of the keys. If they do not work, please, please, please do not assume they just need a battery. If they just needed a battery, why would the person not have spent $5 at Walmart to get batteries for these things? They're easy to change. And the reason I say that is just like in 986 Boxers, not as common on 996s, but if you ever have a water issue, the water collects in the bottom of the car, and the alarm module and immobilizer, which runs this system, sits at the lowest point of the car. It fills with water, and all of a sudden you have an issue. And it usually exhibits, the first way is your key fob starts acting kind of funky. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You think it's going bad on a battery, you replace it and it doesn't get better. So test your keys to make sure that they work. And then lastly, again, I'm going to shout her out again. This is Kim, P1 Design. She does the seat inserts. I put that as a reminder for me to give her a shout out because I love her product. These are, for a .2, your adjustable wing risers. So you can adjust the angle of attack on your wing riser by swapping these out. So for example, these are the 4-degree inserts. These ones are the 8-degree. You can get these from Porsche. You can actually zoom in on the part numbers if someone's ever interested. I really wouldn't suggest changing them, frankly, on a street car. You're just going to burn more fuel and really not notice it at street speeds. But if you do want to change them, that's what those look like. And then the last couple things I want to cover, I'm going to talk a little bit about paint meters. I'll put that on the car. But because I want to make sure I am correct, I did make a couple notes on production numbers. So I'll just read them off here so we know what the production numbers are. So for .1 cars, a total of 1,868 cars worldwide. Again, never in the US. 1,560 of those were left-hand drive. 308 were right-hand drive. Okay. For .2 cars, total production, 2,589 cars. 1,018 of those were North American cars. 958 US, 60 Canada. I'm sorry to my friends north of the border, you're great people. I don't know why you don't get any cars, but 60 cars to Canada. To give you some relative idea on total production, a rarity of 996s, for the .1, 997.1 cars, 1,416 cars came to North America, so 40% more. If we talk .2 cars, which always seem kind of rare, that number is 1,485, so again, 40% more of those. Now when we jump to the 991.1, they just opened the floodgates, 3,720 cars. So we're talking 370% more cars by 991.1. So you get to see a sense of the relative rarity of these cars. I don't have 992 production numbers, and that was just .1s. I don't even have the .2s. For GT3 RSs, again, I'm shopping for one. Please call me if you have a good one. They built 4 in 2003, 678 in 2004, for a total of 682 cars. So you can see why that's a hard car to find. And in total, 5,139 of these cars ever left Stuttgart. So not a lot of those cars out there. And then we're going to just jump and talk about paint meter for a second and a few other items, then we're going to get this thing wrapped up. Okay, everyone asks me this question, so I always got to cover it in my videos. It drives me a little bit bonkers, but it's the reality of the market that we're in today. And that market is that we love original paint, or we like to know if a car's had some sort of accident damage. So the 996, unlike some of my earlier cars we covered, was in an era it was painted robotically. So a couple things to know about the paint on these cars. One, they were all painted robotically in a factory, and all of them are 2-stage paints. There's never single stage, they were never painted by hand. So what you get with that is you get very consistent readings. So really what you're looking for in a paint meter is you're looking for consistency across the car. So if you get an outlier value, that would be something that you would want to pause and investigate further. I will always put this disclaimer out there, is that a paint meter is not, I repeat, not an infallible tool. There are plenty of circumstances where a car can meter in the range of accepted value, and I can definitively tell you it's had repair work. So it's just one piece of information amongst many. So these cars, when they're new, should meter anywhere between a low of maybe 3.5 to a high of maybe 5.5, and they should have a fairly tight variance. And so if I'm going along and this panel's metering 4, and I get to an adjoining panel and it meters 10, it's been repaired in some fashion. So let's go around this car, and I'm going to give you some example readings. So here's the roof, 3.93. That would be what I would expect on the car, 3.92. Let's get the door here, 5.15. The other thing you ought to know on a paint meter too is you got to make sure you get it really square on the panel. So like there, I probably didn't get it really square. So for example, if I get a rating sideways, sometimes I don't get an accurate reading. So if you get one outlier reading, take multiple and drill down on that area. And you want to get multiple readings on multiple panels. So I'm getting, again, 3.90. Again, I should get a similar value on the next panel, 4.74. So again, these are values that are in line with what I think I would see. And again, I'm probably going to get 5 or 6 values on every panel. I also have been around long enough, I know where damage more often occurs. Damage more often occurs on cars on perimeters. So, for example, I'm less likely to find a repair maybe here as I am down by the taillight or someone backs into something. So, you know, I'm always making sure I'm getting multiple readings across the car. So again, this car meters exactly as I would expect. And again, this is a car I have here. I know this car well. I know it's original paint. Now, the other question I get oftentimes is paint protection film. So how do I measure with paint protection film? Well, the way you measure with paint protection film is you know the depth of the film and you would add that on top. So this has PPF on it. PPF generally, most of the common films in the market are 7 or 8 mils thick. So again, if our range is supposed to be 3.5 to 5.5, then I should get a value between, say, 10.5 and 12.5. So let's see what we get here. 12.26, exactly what I would expect. So that's how I would read that. I oftentimes get a question too about, well, how do I read, you know, bumper covers? Well, I'll show you. Oh wait, we don't. You don't get a reading because all this measures essentially is from metal on out. We have a plastic cover. They can measure, the better ones will meter aluminum and steel. I've never seen one that does bumper covers. Bumper covers, that's where a trained eye will generally pick out a bumper cover. And usually the way you're going to find that is you're going to find overspray on pieces of trim, or I look at enough cars and I kind of know what pieces should be black, and sometimes the painters don't pay attention and those get body color. There's usually some giveaways. Although the market generally accepts a repaired bumper cover in a way they maybe would punish the repair of a steel or aluminum panel. So that's the thing to know about that. Again, not an infallible tool, just like my next non-infallible tool, which is Carfax. These cars are newer than some of the cars I review. Carfax, the data is more robust on them. However, it's just one source. In fact, even if you read the fine print on Carfax, it says of information known to Carfax. A similar thing could be said about AutoCheck as an example. So I always suggest running one because you want to know if there's something said about the car that's interesting or useful. But please don't simply take a car that has a clean history report to mean it's never been damaged. So a lot of people say, well, Nathan, how could a car be damaged, as an example, and it not show up on Carfax or it not paint meter wrong? Well, I'll give you an example. Let's say this car's in my garage and a moving box falls off, you know, my upstairs in my garage and lands on the hood, and it can't be repaired. I order a brand new hood from Porsche. It comes already E-coated and primered. My shop paints it. They do a great job. I reinstall it. That likely will meter within the range of original paint. And if I didn't, for example, take the whole car into a shop, it likely didn't get an invoice connected to it, or it went to a shop that is not connected to a publicly known database. A lot of people ask me, well, where do these services get their information? Why does a shop report, or why does a shop not report? A lot of people assume there's some person sitting in the back room that's calling this information, and certainly no shop in the world does that. This is all information that would be mined out of a database. And so generally what happens is the vendor, whether that be a body shop or a service facility, uses a third-party software, and that third-party software somewhere in their user agreement says, you authorize us to release your information to a third party. The shop doesn't pay attention, and a data broker essentially sells that information, and then that's a lot of times where that information gets collected. A shop can generally opt out, but a lot of times they don't even know that they're reporting. So just something worth knowing. whether a shop reports or doesn't report to one of the history agencies, be that AutoCheck or Carfax. So that's kind of some summary things. And again, I always leave with the point, please do follow up with a pre-purchase inspection. Well, either I've bored you to tears or you're already online shopping for a GT3. I don't know which one it is, but I can tell you for me, I love these cars. I really enjoy that the market's coming to them, recognizing their important place in Porsche history. We're gonna go drive a .1 and go drive a .2 and share our impressions with that. But what I would leave you with is, why would someone want one of these cars? What are kind of the driving things? Well, to me, they're the perfect bridge from our air-cooled era to the modern water-cooled era. And they have a little bit of foot kind of firmly in both places. I love the connection with Porsche history, where Porsche was kind of transitioning from really kind of a smaller family company to a more of a bigger, larger corporation that we have today. Both great, but sort of that transitional period. So it's sort of this interesting spot of everything that was kind of coming together and what that meant for Porsche. And so for me, a person who loves the brand, I love the experience, I love these classic Porsches you see in the background, these cars really, really speak to me. And you can see that history. You can see our 997 GT3 in the background, also a really, really amazing car. I know you're going to be asking, when are you going to cover this car? Well, it's coming. I don't know if it's next, but it's on my list. We're going to talk a little bit about 997 GT3s, .1s, .2, RSs, and the almighty, the 4-liter. That is going to be a really fun video. But speaking of fun, let's get on the road. We're going to start with our .1 Clubsport, get some impressions of that car, and then see what the development looks like when we jump to our 2nd generation and see which one I prefer driving. Okay, this is a fun section of road, so we'll go see what we think. Well, like I said earlier, the big thing with these cars, you really got to load up the front end to get the grip. Yeah. They're a little light on front end grip.
Man, I love these seats.
Say notable, the lightweight flywheel, the car spins up nicely for sure.
So definitely lighter feeling than in a regular GT3.
Yeah.
Or 996 Carrera.
Car's real flat. Favorable so far. Of course.
There's that Metzger Flat 6 sound, huh?
I love the soundtrack.
I feel like that's half the reason people buy cars like these.
You know, I even like the off throttle coming down. There's just a little bit of a coarseness to the note of this motor.
Yeah.
I mean, like the M96s are smoother, and they have a nice soundtrack too, but I just like these are almost a little agricultural, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. You got that snarl on the...
it's really good.
On the overrun, right?
Yeah. The other thing, you know, you drive a lot of the modern cars. You know, like I was driving a new 992 GT3 the other day, and they do some sort of alchemy in the software to smooth up. It's probably for emissions reasons or something, but you know, it's sort of that laggy throttle feel. Particularly when you lift the throttle, there's just a little bit of a delay, and same thing even when you put the clutch in and try to get the rev match. There's just a little like,
rev hang,
yeah.
That is definitely emissions related. Yeah.
You know, whereas this car, you don't have that sensation at all. Like,
yeah, Porsche's done a better job, you know, with its brand new cars, you know, of like, I want to say Mazdas or some Toyotas have that rev hang. Porsche's done a good job, but it's still there. You come back to the early 2000s, and you know, nobody was caring about emissions back then, were they?
No.
Not to that extent, at least.
I was going to go left, but they're doing a little detour, so I'm going to go right instead.
So, because this is a club sport and has the basically full cage, can you feel that in the chassis as you're driving it?
You know, I'm going to reserve that and see when we compare it to the other car.
Yeah.
I don't pick up on it to a significant degree.
Yeah. So you truly have to drive it back to back to know for sure.
Yeah, I mean...
And a road like this is probably not the area where you're going to uncover, you know, how much a roll cage is doing for the handling, right?
Yeah. Well, and this is actually, I mean, and I'll share this same feedback, and this is true really on any 996. I mean, you know, carpers people will about the update, you know, from air-cooled to water-cooled, but one thing I do like about this car, at least for my size and everything, like, you know, pedal placement, heel toe, you know, the throws for the shift, everything just falls to hand to me in this car. I feel very comfortable, and I grew up with air-cooled cars, and I'm used to it. I like the bottom hinge pedals and stuff, but the pedal box is a little bit tight. You know, there's a little bit of a reach to get the shift right. Like, it's a much more comfortable environment to drive without distraction in this car. And I like the size of the car. I really feel like I can feel where the corners are. You know, so it's sort of that sweet spot in that I think the driving position's better and visibility's quite good, like an older car. Whereas when you drive, like I said, I was driving the 992 GT3, and it's people overstate the bigness, but you do feel like you can't pick each corner, and you've got the chunkier pillars, so your level of confidence and your visibility and placing the car is not as good. I'm actually floored. One of the things I expected to find on this car that I'm actually not, with the ride height set on this car, my visual was, hey, this car is going to be poorly composed with some bump steer and do a lot of crashing, and oddly, it's not.
Yeah, it's a pleasant ride, you know. You know, my one comparison point is, you know, a 987 Cayman on Öhlins is no less comfortable or more comfortable than this car.
Yeah.
So...
It's a little bummer you came to town on a Friday afternoon in the summer in Seattle, so it's hard to find a good chunk of road here. But
yeah, it's a little bit rush hour right now.
We did get a good little spirited run there.
Yeah. I feel like rush hour starting early because of how beautiful it is today.
Oh, when it's nice in Seattle, people want to get out.
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell for all the viewers that it's terrible here in Seattle. You never want to come here. Please don't.
This is the one day of sun per year, right?
Yeah, it's not as beautiful here as it looks in photos. Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, the Metzger rougher is probably not the absolute right word, but edgier motor, more vibrations and feels, things like that.
I mean, you can definitely feel a motorsports heritage and a connection to Porsche of yore.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people will talk about, and this isn't denigrating the new GT cars because the capability is unbelievable. So I fully appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I will say when people use the term, like they'll drive a 991.2 GT3 or a 992, oh, it's raw. You know, I'm like, no, I'm gonna push back on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
This is raw compared to me driving my 356 or something, or, you know, not raw, right?
Yeah.
But this has enough sort of edge and snarl to it. And again, it demands something of you as a driver. You got to figure out kind of what the chassis is doing. Like with modern, and not just with Porsche, modern cars, you can be really ham-fisted and really have no fundamental sense of what car control is really about and how controlling weight transfer. And like this car, you definitely get the sensation right through the steering wheel. Like if anything, I would say these cars, and I'll be interested to drive the Dot 2 and see if it feels the same way. It teaches you want to load up those front tires.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and some of that may be how a given car is set up. I think we mentioned that, is that sometimes you got to be careful not forming a judgment and saying, well, this is how a given car feels, and say that's true for every, for example, 996.1 GT3.
Yeah.
You need to drive enough of them to say, okay, this has been my experience.
Yeah.
As a, not just the particular one that you are driving.
If you remind me, it's ABS, but no PSM, no traction control, none of that stuff.
No, it has not a nanny of a single kind. I mean, it doesn't even, we were mentioning, not even a variable ratio steering rack, like all the, I believe every Porsche after this does have.
Yeah.
And so the rack quickens up as you get further in.
Yeah.
And it probably, I'll be honest, it probably depends on what your experience with the brand has been. So, probably for a person coming out of modern GT car, this car is going to feel pretty crude and a little bit inaccurate, if you will.
Yeah.
But for me, coming out of like driving, say, a 964 or 993 RS, it feels, connected to that piece.
Yeah.
But with significantly more chassis in particular, and the motor, if I have any carp about, and not to denigrate, because I love those cars too, but like the 993 RS, that motor is not particularly revvy in the way this is.
Yeah, yeah.
This feels much stronger than its 60 horsepower increase over that car would suggest.
Yeah.
So like this is a perfect example. You got to get some load up on it.
Yeah.
And then load it up, and then you can jump on it. Oh,
yeah.
And that's what's kind of fun. Like, and the car has very little chassis movement. I'm just going to flip around here before we go out too far. I think they got the suspension set up pretty well, as long as you have pretty close to ideal tarmac.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not a great car on broken road. In fact, I would argue probably my 996, my regular 996, would feel more composed on a more broken surface than this car.
Yeah.
But given the right road,
I think I was talking about how it was super comfortable, but yeah, we were on a rough road after I said that. You can definitely, like this one here, you can feel the bumps, I'm sure.
Yeah. Like I wouldn't probably push the tempo on a road like this.
Yeah, exactly.
It struggles to maintain directional stability, but
yeah,
again, it was designed to be, track would be a much nicer surface.
Yeah.
So
I can maybe tell there's the steering a little touchier in this, especially when you're on a road like this compared to a Carrera.
Yeah. I mean, this car feels like it could use a little bit of some suspension. I think it's probably likely sitting down a little low in the front. And to me, it feels like it could use a little bit more negative camber dialed in.
Yeah, like this road with all those kind of big dips. Woo.
Yeah, you can see it struggles to maintain a little directional stability.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's a little bit of bump steer just due to ride height.
Yeah.
Although I am amazed at how low it is and how low the clearance. We haven't bottomed out.
Yeah.
Which I'm probably going to jinx this if I say that.
I was going to say. Oh, there we go. Yep.
Notch this back a little bit.
Yeah.
I do like this car. I mean, I think number one, it's the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And it has an urgency and almost a pissed off, like vibe to it.
Yeah. 04 GT3.
Yeah.
Compared to, that was a 2000 or 2001?
2000.
The 2000, the last one we drove.
Yep. I mean, a couple things just sort of initially that stand out to me on this car. You got a green light person. This has got the dual mass flywheel, so it's quieter at idle, but actually it's not really much lighter effort, and I actually found the engagement a little more positive than the other one, which is interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I don't know that this is true on all 996 GT3s .2s, be interesting. This one's got a little bit of a rougher idle, and not necessarily rough in a good way. I mean, it almost feels like we were talking like a. Yeah, sometimes you want a little bit of a lope that says, "Hey, I'm here to hear about some business." This one's just a little rougher. This car does have PCCBs, which are a little bit noisy on initial bite, and they have just a little bit of lag, but then they have a stronger bite. You see when I drive them a little more aggressively what I think, but it's interesting. My 996 Turbo has PCCBs, and they're dead quiet, so yeah. I know they can be, but I do know PCCBs are known to be a little bit noisy.
Interesting.
On initial application.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got to say, on our drive out to this road, I was talking about how surprised I was at how comfortable the Clubsport was, that .1 Clubsport. And it was, for having a cage, it was comfortable. But this is, I think, the word you used was plush, comparatively speaking.
Which is so funny because I would have never described, I owned one for a long time. I never would have described plush in the terminology. But again, that's why the beauty of doing these back-to-back drives to see. I mean, this car feels very composed.
Yeah.
I can tell you right away, I like the steering feel better on this car, but again, that very much could be alignment settings. I sort of suspect that the other car is not optimized. Maybe we'll get lucky. Here's our road that I like so much. Immediately, I'll tell you, it's harder to get the rev match in this car with the dual mounts. But the immediacy of the throttle response in this car is markedly stronger.
I like this engine more.
Oh, yes. Oh, dang it, we have someone in front of us.
Yeah. This engine sounds more special, too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Big difference.
That's really interesting. I do miss that single mass flywheel. See, it's hard for me to get my rev match there. Not bad, but yeah, that right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Much bigger difference than I thought it would be.
Man, do I miss that flywheel though.
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't want to make anybody mad, but I almost feel like the way I would describe this is the .1 motor feels more like a Carrera on steroids, and this feels like a motorsports engine.
Yeah, agreed. I was thinking the exact same thing.
Man. Right there.
Yeah, comes right on cam.
I will say the linearity of the pedal feel on the application for the PCCBs is better too.
Yeah.
But again, that could be car to car, but
yeah.
This doesn't bode well for fun driving.
No, it doesn't, does it? At least we got in a couple good turns there.
Yeah. Maybe we should call the 996.2 motor the birth of the first Porsche street motorsport engine.
Yeah. Yeah, the 2000, it definitely felt more pedestrian, just like your average everyday. And if you sat me in that car blindfolded and I didn't know it was a GT3.
That's brilliant.
I probably would have trouble thinking that from the sound of the engine and how it felt. But this .2 engine is.
So now I'm gonna have to dig into the changes.
But we're gonna have to do a whole other video, right? No.
Yeah, and like what would give it that sense? Now, again, I talked about this earlier in the walk-around portion of the video, how badly I want a .2 RS, because the one thing I am missing on this car is the light flywheel. Like it was can imagine, and again, lighten the car up, strip out 100 some odd pounds, give it a light flywheel.
Yeah.
I can see how that car could really talk to you. Put on some sport cups on it.
Yeah. That would be an amazing car.
Yeah.
Backroad beast.
Interesting.
I feel like you've learned something today, even.
Yeah, which is interesting because I hate to say it, I radically, and I'll use the word radically, prefer the aesthetics of the .1. So, the good news, I have a .1, the Aerokit car, which actually is a really wonderful car.
Yeah.
I can't say enough good about it.
You know what this is all making me think about right now? I wonder what the Classic Club Coupe drives like.
Oh, paging Jerry.
I know, paging Jerry,
yeah.
please. .1 with a .2 motor. It's like the perfect combo, I feel like.
Yeah, that's true. So my complaints are the shift knob, doesn't fall to hand, and the squeaky PCCBs, but the motor, yes. It's got just a texture and a vibrato and just a angry, like it feels more like a motorsports engine. In fact, that's one of my things I always think is funny is people say, I modified my car, it's just like a cup car. I mean, what you're just proving to me is you actually haven't driven a cup car. And don't get me wrong, like I've modified cars too, and I think, it feels more like an RS or whatever I go, but once you've driven one of those, then you understand. Like it's kind of like take a 964 and a 964 RS, both brilliant cars, different cars, and you think, well, gosh, on paper, it's such small things. How can it really feel that different if I put the same dampeners on it and stuff? But somehow deep in the basement of Porsche, they pour some secret sauce out of some secret tunnel that washes over the car and gives it this mojo that it's so hard to replicate.